I was given the stamp of approval before the lecture that the physicians in the audience should take me seriously, and
that's a good thing, eh?
yeah, and they loved me, and I mean they really bought into the arguments. And it's funny, afterwards when you give these grand rounds, you get the reviews, and so about 50 reviews come in, and 49 of them are excellent, and one of them was a guy who just gave me zeros straight across the board. He obviously thought I was a complete and utter quack, and nothing I said or did was going to convince him otherwise.
You must have experienced that a few times.
Well, and then what happened is, for instance, I gave a talk at a childhood obesity seminar at USC. I was the last talk of the day, and I was introduced by the organizers as having a guy, a journalist, who wrote this book, and he held it up and he said, and it's a big book.
Yeah, it is a big book.
And that was the extent of the introduction, and there, the other expert research, the other, academic research in the audience all left midway through the talk. Because I run long, as I usually do, and at the 45-minute mark, they all got up en masse and left to go outside where they were having, cocktails and hors d'oeuvres of very cheap wine and low-fat cheeses. But the rest of the clinicians in the audience, people who actually dealt with patients, and the dietitians, they tend to stick around, they tend to buy into it, they tend to believe it, because they're the ones who, you can divide the ones, the people who actually deal with obese patients, and the people who study obesity, usually in laboratory rats. And the ones who deal with obese patients are exceedingly sympathetic to the fact that there has to be something else going on. And
they kind of need something that works better, right?
Yeah. They need results. They're not getting them with the conventional wisdom, so they're sympathetic. And the ones who study lab rats, to them, I'm just some journalist who's telling them that they don't know their jobs and that I can do it better.
And they don't want to start over from scratch, right?
Well, not only do they not want to, they get funded to do it.
They really can't do it.
Yeah, it's my wife calls it, we all have our shticks, my shtick now is talking about obesity and diet and nutrition, even though my shtick used to be high energy physics. These people, their shtick is whatever they did their PhD theory on.
So what you need to do perhaps is get more people to sign up to your shtick.
Well, that's what you have to get people to sign up to your shtick. It's a Yiddish word, S-C-H-T-I-C-K.
Yeah, but I think you're doing that.
Well, I might be, and that's the point.
Takes some time, though.
There are some very smart bloggers out there now, and like yourself, who are talking about this, who get a lot of viewers. Actually, the weird thing from my point of view is some bloggers out there, I read them and I think, my God, these people are smart. Like, I can't compete.
Why don't you blog?
A, I haven't had time.
Well, that's a
B,
good reason.
I'm a journalist. I actually get paid to write. So when I'm smart enough to write, I should technically be earning a living because I have children I have to send through college. I will start blogging in the near future.
Maybe you can build up an audience and sell more books, though.
Well, that's the logic, and that's why I will start blogging in the near
looking
future.
Forward to it. Just quickly, you had a lecture yesterday talking about maybe not so much weight, but more disease and cancer specifically,
well, this
and
is where
sugar.
It gets
an interesting story.
Yeah, this is where it gets tricky. When you're obese or diabetic or insulin resistant, it increases your risk. It goes along with an increased risk of a whole slew of diseases that are known as Western diseases. Cancer, diabetes, heart disease, gout, arthritis, osteoporosis, dental caries, cavities, Alzheimer's.
The list goes on.
And the list goes on, and they're called Western diseases because these diseases are far more prevalent in societies that eat Western diets and live Western lifestyles than they are in isolated populations that eat their traditional diets. So, and these diseases also all tend to be increasing in prevalence in the past 30 or 40 years in coincidence with the obesity epidemic. So the idea is, the sort of underlying hypothesis is whatever it is that makes us fatter, either directly or indirectly through the fattening process, causes these diseases, and that includes cancer. Not all cancers, but most cancers.
And what thing is that?
Well, if you really wanted to get, again, the one answer would be refined carbohydrates, starches, and sugars. One answer would be perhaps sugar is the fundamental. Sugars, by which I mean sucrose, table sugar, and high fructose corn syrup.
And that would be fructose then, I guess. The difference between starches and sugars?
You know, the question is whether fructose alone, we don't consume fructose alone. Sucrose, you know, is 50-50 fructose and glucose, and high fructose corn syrup is 55-45.
Yeah.
Do you get high fructose corn syrup in Sweden?
Not in large quantities. We get another form of sugar, 50-50.
Which then from beet sugar?
It's from beets, yeah, sure, beets.
So that's one of the questions is, I mean, fructose is certainly what differentiates these, you know, they're called caloric sweeteners from starches. Mm-hmm. So the fructose in that sense is probably the factor that, it may indeed be the factor that just initially induces insulin resistance, and by inducing insulin resistance sets off this chain of events that includes fattening.
And we don't really know yet.
But we don't really know yet. And you can make an argument, as I did in my lecture, that if we didn't have sugars, if we didn't have caloric sweeteners, or if they existed at, say, 1/3 what we eat them today, that we wouldn't have any of these chronic diseases.
Then we could eat carbohydrates, other carbohydrates.
Yeah, and we wouldn't get cancer, and we wouldn't get Alzheimer's. I don't know what we would get, and I don't know what we die of, which is an interesting
That's a good question. Old age.
Yeah, but how would it manifest itself? I was just talking to this wonderful physician, Mary Vernon, today, who lives in Kansas and has horses, and she described one of her 25-year-old ponies as walking out into a field this winter and lying down and dying.
That's a good thing, eh? That's a good thing.
But that's, you know, we don't really have evidence. Well, I guess we'll find out, those of us who
you had a lot of interesting historical anecdotes about you know, people being free from Western diseases before they got our food. What's the most amazing such anecdote, would you say?
Most amazing? It's hard for me this time in the morning to think the most amazing. I mean,
no, just give us a good one.
You know, you go back and you read the literature, which I did back in the British Medical Journal, The Lancet. Because the British Empire, while it still existed, had these colonial and missionary physicians scattered all around the world, and they would write into the journals these letters that would usually say something like, I'm the mission officer, mission physician in British Central Africa. I've been working here for 16 years. I've got a native black African population of about 8,000 and a local white population of about 300 loggers and missionaries and traders and their families. And in the 16 years I've been here, I've seen 27 cancers in the white population and 2 in the black population, and those 2 were in, you know, women who were working as domestics in town for the whites.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and it's just...
And you had like tens of those kind of stories.
There are hundreds of them, and they're trained in... these physicians were trained in England, the United States, or Europe. They were smart, dedicated men who wanted to make a difference. They weren't idiots. They knew that the populations they were dealing with were old enough to get cancers. It wasn't that everybody was dying at 30. They would have noticed that. One of these doctors who made this observation was Albert Schweitzer, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1953. So, and it's just one of these observations that was kind of forgotten. With the Second World War, and as the world became more and more westernized, that same observation has transformed, but it still exists. And it led people in the 1950s to conclude that as much as 70% of cancers in Western societies could be prevented by changes in diet and lifestyle.
So if we stop eating sugar and perhaps not as much carbohydrate, would we get no cancers?
Well, I hope so. And if I die of cancer,
very few cancers,
I'm going to be very disappointed.
Oh, you are?
It's really going to depress me.
The question is if you started in time, you know.
What's that?
If you started to eat low carb in time?
Well, that's always one question. I was a smoker when I was younger, so for all I know, I have, you know, incipient lung cancer.
So if you get lung cancer, everybody's going to think it's because of the low carb.
Oh, you know, if I get, my favorite line about that was from this fellow Blake Donaldson, who said if you get moles in your front lawn, they're going to blame it on your diet, not eating carbohydrates.
Of course, yeah. So what's coming up next? You have a new book.
I've finished a new book that's going to be called Why We Get Fat.